Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to welcome to our presentation, thank you, of our interdisciplinary research, data utility as an enabler of data spaces, the circular economy as a case study. It's a product of our joint PhD topic. We both, Charlotte and I, are working on the datafication of the circular economy just from two very different perspectives. She's working in the Center of IT and IP Law of the KU Leuven, and I'm on the Department of Materials Engineering of KU Leuven. So you can imagine a lot of discussions. Our paper or our work tries to answer how can developments in the data economy, namely both data-driven business experience and legal developments, inform the governments of digital product passport systems. We did so by an interdisciplinary literature review of literature in the sustainability and lifecycle engineering and legal fields. So what can you expect the next 90 minutes? First, I'm going to give you a little introduction in the circular economy and digital product passports. Then Charlotte will go deeper into digital product passports and their materialization in law. Then we will talk a little bit about public utilities and especially data public utilities, and then make a connection together between digital product passports and data utilities. So the climate crisis starts a discussion how to make our economy more sustainable and more environmental friendly. From this stems the idea from industrial ecology, actually the concept of circular economy, which then became a declared political goal of the European Union. The circular economy promises economic growth while being environmental friendly. The circular economy has a lot of definitions. In our case, and also in the European Commission, we're especially keen on the product level. So on the product level, there are so-called 10 R strategies. You know them because they all start with an R. Reuse, recycle, recover. You see them at the bottom of our infographic. So the idea is to have certain strategies of products to keep them in the loop, in the value chain of the economy. So the question then arises, why is there no circular economy if we already have strategies, what to do with the product? One of the assumptions is that there are information gaps which hinder the product strategies more or less. So the European Commission came up with an idea of product passports. You can see them in the infographic spanning over the product's value chain is an information system who should close those information gaps. We made also a clear distinction between information flows and data. As we heard yesterday, everybody wants information, but anybody is giving just data. And so we having a little conflict here that the European Commission tried to close in two proposals right now. On the one hand, we have the eco design regulation from 2022. It's just a proposal, and also the battery regulation from 2020, so over 2 years old now, waiting for approval in the Parliament and in the Council. And we have one draft already on construction products regulation from 2022, 3 months old, who is now under public review. All those three regulations have some kind, in different words, a product passport implemented already, or the concept of a product passport implemented already.
I will be short on the explanation of what this notion of product passport is in the proposals of the Commission, because I will critically discuss them. So first, they entail a distinction that is being made every time between digital product passports on the one hand that should be managed by private actors, especially private actors along the product value chain. So you think of the manufacturer, the original manufacturer and then possibly the forthcoming manufacturers in case of refurbishment and so on. That's on the one hand. And then on the other hand, the idea is to have a repository, sometimes called platform, because it's trendy, but sometimes repository, while it sounds more old-fashioned. And this one would be managed by the European Commission themselves. And with this repository, you would gather not only all the digital product passports, but also all the data and information into these digital product passports, because you have to figure out digital product passports as a digital twin, this notion that we discussed yesterday. So it's attached to every product. It's decentralized in a way. So then you have the repository that centralizes information. Now I'm turning to the challenges that arise from digital product passports. So first, conceptually, as it emerged mainly in engineering literature, because there's not much more than engineering literature on this. And then I will discuss the legislative proposals. So we have three main challenges arising, so conceptually. So first, we have a dichotomy between the willingness to have data and information shared throughout the value chain, the idea being to have open access so everyone can enjoy data, blah, blah, blah. While on the other hand, you also have data or information that are protected or that are constrained by legitimate interests, sometimes protected by law. So you know the story, IP rights, personal data protection, blah, blah, blah. Secondly, there is an issue with trust, very common with data provision. The question being that the data provider may not trust what the data user will do with the data, while the data user does not trust the origin and the quality of the data origin. Third main issue, and actually it's the main topic of our research here, it's governance. Governance is a blind spot in the discussion on digital product passports, while we think it's crucial, so it's our main hypothesis. We have mainly two types of models that that are discussed in a way in the literature. On the one hand, you have the idea that you should have complete decentralization of data with blockchains and so on. And on the other hand, you would claim for centralization of data and data management. But it's actually very implicit because, as I said, it's mainly engineering literature. And I'm sorry to criticize the engineers, but sometimes they miss out on governance. So then the legislative proposal. So here we focus especially on the eco-design regulation proposal. Why? Because it's the broadest in scope. So the idea is to potentially address all products or all product groups. But the principles are quite the same in the three legislative proposals. So as I said, you have this digital product passport that is attached to the product with many data provider, many data user. And then you have a question as for what type of activity should be performed with the digital product passport. So data provider and data reuser, they will not deal with the same data, obviously, and especially because you have different data users, they want to use data for different purposes. So it cannot be that you have always the same type of data. You have to process data in the meantime. And this is actually overlooked in the legislative proposal. So we don't know actually. And we also don't know who would do this, who would process such data so that it is aligned with the purpose for which they should be reused. A related question is the question of data quality and data and up-to-dateness. Very basic actually, but so the basic idea with the legislative proposal seems to be that the data provider, whoever this is, should provide data that is up to date, that is of good quality and so on. But we think it's a bit naive because you need to have, and it's our related second criticism, you need to have certain coordination. Between all the data that should be provided here. You need to have some intelligence with the data. As it's commonly said, nobody wants data, everyone wants information. So how do we get there? we have other critiques, but I will keep it a bit simple. So then on the other hand, you have this idea of having a centralized repository managed by the European Commission. And the idea would be that in contrast to digital product passports that should be used by private entities, so whether companies or customers, the idea with the repository seems to be that it should be a means for public authorities to get access to data when they need this. So customs, and this links to, I think, an interesting geopolitical element of the circular economy in the EU that we want to, I don't know if it's protectionism, and it's also for good reasons, but the idea is really to have circular economy at the border of the EU. So it means customs plays a huge role here. Competent authorities, that means especially enforcement authorities. And the European Commission for their own purpose. We also have potentially national authorities that would like to use the data to enrich their indicators. This is an interesting use. But then, yeah, I have too many arrows. Then the question is, how do you coordinate between the two types of structure? And there's not much in the legislative proposal. So basically, the European Commission refers to implicitly, this is what I understand of how they want to govern all this. They refer to decentralized data systems on the one hand, and then they refer to many occurrences in which the European Commission could issue implementing or delegated regulations. So our assumption is such regulations will, in a way, coordinate all this. But yeah, sorry. But this is pretty missing. So we think it's a bit naive to think that both technology and heavy bureaucratic regulation and centralized repository managed by the European Commission, we think it's naive to think that this alone would serve coordination and governance. So from this analysis, we try to outline objectives that should apply to data product passports and data product passport systems related to governance. Because it's missing, we try to identify what's necessary. So because we need to coordinate the needs of the data providers and data users, and because they have certain rights on the data that have to be addressed probably on an ad hoc basis, then it means that you have to have a governance model that is flexible, but also adaptable to its environment. And here we criticize the bureaucratic drift that can be expected from this idea from the Commission that you can have that many implementing and delegated acts that would address those problems. Then secondly, we should recognize and enable coordination and intermediation tasks, which are the core of the digital product passports, the core of the expectations that lie with digital product passports, but it's not really addressed. As I mentioned before, we need data and information quality, suitability for the respective needs of data users. That means that we need circular economy professionalism and data professionalism, as well as enforcement mechanisms, but we don't deal with those too much here because it's yet a big question. And then I think a very major thing is that the digital product passports governance should reflect and embed the circular economy objectives. So as Rene explained, the circular economy is a political project to circularize products. But this political project is based on a very strong market orientation. This being the idea is to channel the economy towards the general interest. So you really have there an intertwined relationship between the public and the private logics in a way. And with the proposal from the Commission, it's kind of strange that you have a bit of market-led initiatives, then a bit of bureaucratic-led initiatives. And both of them seem to be kind of extreme, and there's nothing to coordinate the two. So this is where we turn to public utilities as part of our broader field of research. So I will be quite quick. This is only an example because I'm of a French background. So you could say public utilities is different from a jurisdiction to another. But in France, I would say that public utility is what we call public service of industrial and commercial nature. Public utility is part of public service that was discussed in the prior presentation, but shortly said, public utility is more targeted to economic dimension. So usually you would have a market in which services are provided. It doesn't mean that there would not be subsidies, but it means there is an economic dimension here. So you would have public and private logics very much intertwined. So I'm not going into the details here because I assume that we all have a basic idea what public utility is, but we can go back to this notion if need be. And then we argue that in the digital environment, broadly said, we actually have data public utilities that are emerging, although it's quite new, and we try to categorize them. We think we can categorize with three different types. So the first one and the most obvious one is the explicit involvement of states in the data economy. So we have two examples, the Vlaamse nutsbedrijf, so the Flemish data public utility. So that's its very name, that is in the process of being created. We have examples in France with Public Service de la Donnée, data public service, although it's probably more of an administrative nature than of an economic nature, but it might change because with data, you easily change from one to the other. Then I relate very much to the prior presentation. We have this whole discussion on whether online platforms should be considered as infrastructure and whether it should lead to regulation as public utilities. We have this discussion in the US, we have this discussion in the EU, and then public utility is viewed as a normative construct that could respond all the questions that we have how to regulate online platforms. But we claim there is a third category that actually, especially with the Data Governance Act, we have actors that are being regulated essentially as public utilities, although it's not really reckoned as such. And there we refer to chapter 2 and chapter 3 respectively with different types of bodies. So first we have public sector bodies with this specific regime that should complement Open Data Directive with data that are protected by rights of third parties. And I think it's even more interesting, we have in chapter 3 basically private data intermediaries. So data sharing service providers. And if you look at the long lists that were discussed yesterday of obligations or actually conditions for them to provide their services, you could actually see you could actually compare with typical public utilities type of obligation. So you have a behavioral obligation, let's say front, you have structural unbundling. This you could say, okay, this is something we know from competition law, although it's extreme, it's quite extreme in terms of remedies. You can also find those in ex-ante regulation of network industries. But then we have another one, which is service continuity that was discussed before. So you have a reasonable service continuity condition. And this is very striking, especially for me as a French lawyer, because for service continuity in France, we love it, but it applies only to public law regulated type of bodies. It's very rare to see it in economic law. So yesterday you referred to other intermediaries, such as in the finance sector, which I don't know. So maybe we have such things, but to me, this is quite striking. The question now is, okay, what's the relationship between the two? What can we learn from public utilities and especially data public utilities that could serve digital product passports and that should respond all the challenges that we identify? So we think we can identify a few lessons from data public utilities. So it's visible that there is this new upsurge of public utility with data in the digital environment, which is actually interesting because it stems a lot from the EU, while traditionally the EU was, as was discussed previously, was pushing for liberalization and a bit less of public utility or public service obligations for the sake of the free market. But now with data and with the digital environment, it seems to be the other way around. So there seems to be really a shift in the political mindset here. Secondly, I'm not going into the details here, but there are a lot of lessons that can be learned from the history of the obligations incumbent on public sector bodies with respect to data sharing. The history is super interesting. It stems from making data available as they are, from now what we have in the Data Governance Act, with really an active involvement of public sector bodies that is expected to be played, so that precisely they can coordinate between the needs of and the rights of data providers and of data users. To the extent that the Data Governance Act has this option that member states could create a new body, actually, a new public authorities that would be dedicated to doing this on behalf of all the public sector bodies, which I think is just the last step of a very long history. So what does it mean? It means it's never only about data. It's always more than data. A saying you can just make data available as they are and all the problems are solved is a myth. And it links back to what Kingsbury, so a US scholar on infrastructure, says that infrastructure is not only a thing, it's a set of relations, processes and imaginations. And I think with data, it's what we see. So we go back in history with the, also discussed yesterday, OECD qualification of data or some data as infrastructure. Now we see it cannot be only data. If you qualify certain data as infrastructure, you have to go beyond that. You have to take into account the environment, the needs, the technological environment, all the rights that are there around. And it's especially the case with data, because data is very specific. We say it's contextual, it's relational, it's not a table. And also because we don't have something like data ownership. We don't have a by default legal status of data. Third and final, and I think it links to the presentation of Matthias and Juan, that we can see here that although we have different types of data public utilities at stake, the one thing that is common to all of them is that it's intermediation, coordination that is expected to be the core of their activity. We have different types of data providers, users, blah, blah, blah. But in any case, it's about coordination. So it raises the question whether platforms is the appropriate governance model. And most of the time it's platform, of course, that is looked at as a relevant governance model. Then I will give the floor to Rene again. So here with this table, we try to bring the two. So what data public utilities, how do they respond the problems that we have with digital product passports governance?
So at the end, you just see an overview of that is summarizing more or less our whole work. What we identified, 6 different aspects of major governance of digital product passport systems, and then 3 different models we tried to compare. On the one hand, we have the blockchain technology. On the very right, a very decentralized idea, mostly stemming from engineering literature. We're more or less saying, okay, technology will take over everything and we don't need governance. However, we still have the problem of public and private blockchains, which are contradicting each other. On the very left side, we have the proposal of the European Commission with a very centralized view, and might lead to a very bureaucratic way of handling data spaces or digital product passport systems. And then our middle way we try to present with public data utilities, which are, because of their nature, between private and public, to handle both cases and hopefully bringing the best intermediation of data and of general interest. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Okay, thank you. I will be discussing your paper. So, I mean, I like what you are trying to do. It's work in progress, and you know, at the end, I will mostly make methodological recommendations, and you know, it's good to know it's a PhD, so you can structure it. But first, you will have to work a little bit on the title. It's too convoluted, but okay. But the case, the example from which you think the digital product passport, I think it's an excellent case. I have not seen it anywhere yet, and it's original and it's highly relevant. So this is the good case. Then you're interested, your focus is on the governance of all this, okay? So that's fine. It's very ambitious, but I think it's doable as PhD, or I didn't understand whether you do a joint PhD or whether you do two PhD, but it's certainly, but I think in the beginning, you define the problem. And you put it into context. I think this is, I like the problem definition, including the fact that you see that you highlight this tension that between promoting the market and the market solutions and then the public policy objectives. I think you don't answer, but I think it's good to highlight that kind of tension. It's a problem of the European Union to begin with. Because we want to have market solutions to public problems, but you know, maybe in the problem definition you could bring out the relating to the our previous paper, the public interest more clearly, the different dimensions of the public interest. You know, it's not even clear for myself, but I think there are various dimensions to that. And as you say, you know, where it originally comes from, first it's industrial ecology, which is just the history of it, which is just a technological approach. Then it became a little bit more economic, the circular economy, and then it became more political. And I think to each of those, you have different public policy objectives, but okay. Then I think you jump a little bit too quickly to the data utilities as the solution to the problem. And I'll make a recommendation after to the methodology, but okay, so you discuss these data utilities. I think what you have in mind, I mean, I'm very sympathetic to this because before being a professor of management of infrastructures, I was a professor of state-owned enterprises, okay? So, you know, but the model is finished. That you know, you're trying to revive a model that at least you will have to discuss more, you know, a model that somehow in the context of liberalization disappeared. And especially, I think what you have in mind, you never use that word, but it's what you have in mind is EPIC, entreprise, I don't know, publique, industrielle et commerciale. It's this French model of a state-owned enterprise working in the public interest. It doesn't exist anymore, but okay, but why not? I'm not saying, but at least needs a better argument. And then also when you discuss sort of the European, you discuss then the European approach. I'm not sure, I mean, your discussion, your critique of this technocratic over-regulatory, does that really, I was not clear, does that include what is now coming, the data spaces? You know, it is not totally clear to me which data space you are talking about. And when we are dealing with these new data spaces, yes, the environmental data space will fit in there. I don't know what else, the energy data. I don't know whether there is a link to, and And maybe you should talk to Günther also about this operators platforms. Maybe that's some some link. So okay, then you have this table at the end, and it comes a little bit as a surprise, because at the end, okay, you have this European thing, you have your utilities, and then you have blockchain. And this is not at the same level. I mean, blockchain is a techno-fix, and you say yourself, blockchain still will need to have to be governed. So it's not at the same level. You're not comparing exactly. So now my recommendations for the structure. I think, I mean, you start with, and it's PhD structure, you define the problem, and maybe maybe a little bit of literature analysis. I'm sure other people have written about bits and pieces of this, but for a PhD, you have to do this anyway. So I don't know exactly which literature you would look for, but so you define the problem and you do most of it already here, but at the end of that, maybe a more clear definition. Okay, what are the criteria for evaluation? Okay. Against what do we have to evaluate? The public interest, the different public interest, things like that, the governance. And then the second one is qualitative research. You describe the case in a very descriptive, because currently it's very intertwined between analysis and description. It's not, but I come from phenomenological research. Okay, so this is the phenomenon, the digital product passport, the history, how it works, all this, you describe it without judgment. And then from there, you develop the challenges for governance. And then you evaluate the different governance models that exist. Maybe there is, okay, and you have to, and then you can conclude, okay, and the data utilities would be, according to these criteria, the best governance model that would apply. And in which case, at the end, you have to make a judgment. Is that realistic? Can we revive that model? That model that has disappeared with liberalization. But so I think the more is that the case, the criteria, the different models, the evaluation of the models, and then some sort of recommendation. Thank you.